Ukraine is actually moving up in the world when you think about it. Now, historically, up until yesterday, when Ukraine got invaded, it was because Napoleon had to cross it to get to Russia, or the Wehrmacht had to cross it to get to Russia, or the Red Army had to cross it when they were chasing the Wehrmacht all the way back to Berlin. Which is to say, Ukraine doesn't have a whole lot of experience at being invaded for its own right, for its own sake, at least not in the last 300 years or so. Ukraine is just the place you pillage on the way to the place you're actually invading. But not anymore, boys and girls, because we're well into the second day of what looks to all intents and purposes like a general ground invasion that's happening on 3 different fronts. The sort of full-scale invasion that nobody really thought was coming except for the intelligence community and the fake news media, who typically are wrong about nearly everything, so it was easy to dismiss them in this case. I think there's a parable about a blind squirrel and an acorn that seems strangely apropos at the moment. But anyway, if you're in a chat room or on a comment thread and there's a Russian guy and a Ukrainian guy there's been quite a bit of this lately, so you may have already seen this phenomenon up close. The discussion will instantly devolve to the Russian guy saying Ukraine is a made-up country and the Ukrainians are a made-up people, and the Ukrainian guy will then tell the Russian guy that he's full of shit and the devil incarnate, and it goes on from there. It's a bit like what always happens when Israelis and Palestinians get around each other for longer than 5 seconds. The Palestinians are an invented people. Oh yeah, well, Israel was dreamed up by the British Foreign Secretary, so there you Zionist pig. The point being, when you've got a current-day crisis, the causes of which are underpinned by over 1,000 years' worth of ethnic grievances, there is never anything to gain by interjecting oneself into the middle of the thing. To the extent that they're a small country being invaded and, by all appearances, forcibly annexed by a much more powerful neighboring country, I stand with the Ukrainians. I think President Zelensky is a brave and decent man and an honorable public servant in a country riven with corruption. I think Vitaly Klitschko, mayor of Kiev, former heavyweight champion of the world, I think he's all of those things as well. I hope neither of them gets killed. I hope nobody gets killed, above and beyond those who already have. But I don't want to spend a lot of time tonight on pointless analyses of the historical grievances between Russians and Ukrainians. Whether they are separate peoples or different branches of the same nation, it matters not for our purposes, nor does the question of whether Ukrainian is a discrete language or merely a dialect of Russian. We will leave those arguments to the people whose ancestors have been spending the last 50 generations arguing about it. I want to talk about people who are alive today. Specifically, people who bear the moral culpability for having molded the set of circumstances that got us to where we are today. You think Ukraine just became a battleground yesterday, or in 2008, or in 2004? Think again. Ukraine is the front line of the only war Vladimir Putin really cares about. And that is the war between Russia's national identity and what he perceives as the encroachment of Western cultural imperialism. In Ukrainian politics, both of the main factions will tell you the other side is supported by and working on the behalf of foreign agitators. And they are both right. You've got the pro-Russian faction on the one side, propped up mainly by the Russian government, and you've got the Ukrainian nationalist faction on the other side, which is propped up primarily by our State Department. It was one of Hillary Clinton's passion projects, both as a senator and as Secretary of State, to dump as much money as possible into the coffers of the Ukrainian nationalists, and thus to rid Ukrainian politics of the malign influence of Vladimir Putin and open the country up to being bled white by the Clinton Foundation and the Biden crime family. So make no mistake. There has been a Cold War going on these last 30 years since the official Cold War came to an end. Russia and the United States have been waging war on one another, but the battlefield wasn't any piece of ground in the traditional sense. The battlefield was Ukrainian politics. Ukrainian politics are sleazy and corrupt because your tax dollars made it that way. And yes, Vladimir Putin does lay awake at night worrying about being invaded, but it's not a military invasion he worries about. It's an invasion of insane, woke, radical, leftist, Western anti-culture, the same sort of stuff that's currently rotting our own society from the inside out. That is the real enemy, as Putin sees it, and our leaders would do well to start orienting their thinking around that reality. And you, Jim Eagle, would do well to hit the music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we turn back invaders the old-fashioned way, with fire and boiling tar. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program, and a very happy Friday to you and yours. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. When we first met Mr. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, it was back in December of 2019 when President Donald Trump was impeached over a phone call between the two of them, the contents of which were judged by some self-important douchebags in the diplomatic corps to have been insufficiently congruent with what they thought the president should have said. It sounds so absurd, doesn't it, when you say it out loud? But yeah, a president of the United States, for only the fourth time in our history, was impeached, and 48 goddamn senators voted to remove him from office over a 5-minute phone call with the Ukrainian president, in which Trump's real crime, as you and me and everybody else knows, was in intimating that he wanted to see an investigation into Hunter Biden and Burisma. But that is beyond the pale of acceptable conduct for a president, sneered the fake news media and permanent Washington. You're not allowed to ask why the former vice president's stripper-impregnating crackhead son was getting paid $100 per month to sit on the board of directors of Ukraine's #1 energy conglomerate. Just who the hell do you think you are anyway? But we also know, of course, that the phone call with Zelensky was just a last-minute substitute. That impeachment was supposed to be all about Russian collusion. They gave Bob Mueller a staff of hundreds, a 9-figure budget, 22 months in which to get the job done. And the job, of course, was bring us something we can use to impeach Trump. We don't care what it is. We don't care how you do it. Just bring us something impeachable, because we have already got this thing on the calendar, so don't go dropping the ball on us and leave us scrambling around for a last-minute replacement. But then, that is exactly what Mueller wound up doing. Whether it was due to advanced senility or a sudden attack of I don't want to perjure myself and go to prison syndrome, Mueller handed in a report which contained no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, and it must have been quite a rigorous investigation indeed, because not only did they fail to find the collusion, they didn't even find out that Hillary Clinton paid for the collusion. And when you pay millions of dollars to a corrupt former British intelligence operative to fabricate evidence of treason against your political opponent because you're so damn afraid you might lose the election, you should be able to get a better return on your investment, I would think. I mean, what the hell is this country coming to when your campaign pays good money for the most heinous crime in the history of American elections, framing the other party's nominee as an agent of a hostile foreign power? And the special prosecutor can't even find any evidence of it, even after he looks for 2 years? Not a scrap? Nothing? Mueller couldn't even find the fake evidence that Hillary paid the British spy to invent. And how embarrassing is that? You pay good money to be installed in the presidency, and what the hell do you get? I feel you, Hillary. I would be mad too. Stay strong, girlfriend. But when we met Zelensky during the fake impeachment, the first fake impeachment, that is, not the even faker second impeachment, much was made of the fact that he was a political neophyte, an outsider, a TV comedy actor who basically played the Michael Scott role in the Ukrainian adaptation of The Office. And it was difficult not to see right off the bat the similarities between Zelensky and Trump. Ukrainian politics got to the point 4 years ago where the people, they were ready to throw up their hands and say, we're tired of having a false choice between Russian puppets and American puppets when all we ever get in the end is more corruption and more bad governance. And so the thinking went, if we want a man we can actually trust, a man whose character and reputation are not tainted by association with our country's sleazy-ass politics, then we have to find him outside politics. We are so serious about this, we are so fed up with the status quo that we're willing to install a guy from the entertainment industry as president of the country, because that is how badly our professional political class has failed us. That is how little we trust our leaders, which is a hell of a lot like what our people were saying when we made Donald Trump the president. That was 60-odd million Americans metaphorically leaning their heads out the proverbial window and screaming, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. And I will go so far as to put Donald freaking Trump in the White House if that is what it takes to convince you assholes that I'm not screwing around." And we should avoid, whenever possible, I think, acting like every world event is attributable directly to some action that the U.S. president took or didn't take. It's something both sides do because it's politically expedient. So it's easy for Trump, yesterday to make political hay by saying, well, Russia only invaded Ukraine because Joe Biden is weak. And that might even be true. But it doesn't get us any closer to understanding why this particular war has begun or the ingredients that went into it, because those ingredients were being baked into the cake since all the way back at the end of 1991 when the Soviet Union was collapsing. But make no mistake, many of this war's primary authors, they are American. One of them, in fact, is the current president. Between 20 and 30 years ago, our country's leaders, idiot Democrats, idiot Republicans alike, did a lot of incredibly stupid, wrong-headed things that wound up making today's world a hell of a lot more dangerous and unstable than it ever needed to be. There is no good reason why China should be a superpower today. There is no good reason why our relationship with Russia should be bellicose and adversarial. But people like Joe Biden made it that way. People like George W. Bush and Dick Cheney made it that way. People like Bill and Hillary Clinton made it that way. From Vladimir Putin's perspective, it's difficult to argue that he doesn't have a series of perfectly valid points here. For example, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, there was no longer any practical reason for NATO to continue existing. If the leaders of North America and Western Europe were really serious about advancing the cause of world peace and leaving behind the resentments of the Cold War, the best way of demonstrating that would have been to disband NATO by 1995 at the latest. So what did we do instead? We expanded the son of a bitch. We expanded it long and hard. On the day the Iron Curtain fell, NATO had 16 member states. Today, it has 30. It seems absurd to say it, but maybe that's why it needs to be said. Nearly half of the NATO membership has joined the alliance after the Soviet Union ceased to exist. And the entire reason for NATO being established in the first place was as a check against the Warsaw Pact. If you were Vladimir Putin, wouldn't you be kind of weirded out by that? Imagine for a moment if the Cold War had gone the other way. The Soviets had won and NATO had been disbanded. Would it make sense at that point for the Warsaw Pact to start adding new members? Suppose Mexico joined the Warsaw Pact, and all of a sudden you've got Russian missiles stationed in Tijuana and Mexicali. If you were the U.S. president, would that give you cause for concern that hostile foreign powers were making encroachments and provocations on your sovereign territory? But here's a more pertinent, more pressing question. If NATO had not aggressively expanded itself throughout the 90s and the 2000s, if the U.S. State Department hadn't spent 20 plus years actively meddling in Ukrainian politics, trying to impose Western leftist cultural imperialism right on Vladimir Putin's front door, would there be a Russian invasion of Ukraine right now? To put it more bluntly, how many of our provocations, be they military or political or cultural, is he supposed to tolerate before he responds forcefully? For our political ruling class, this stuff, it's just a fun game they play. It's something to talk about at think tank symposia when they get older. Because our country isn't the one that winds up getting shelled and bombed as a result of their hubris and their soft imperialism. Our neighborhoods aren't the ones that get blown to smithereens. It is not our children who wind up lying dead in the streets. Our ruling class can wreck an unlimited number of foreign countries, reduce vast swaths of the world to a bombed-out hellscape, directly facilitate the horrific deaths of untold thousands of innocent people, and still sleep soundly at night, knowing their kickboxing classes and their $7 latte frappuccinos and their brand new wine racks from Amazon Prime will be totally unaffected. So if you're Vladimir Putin, what do you see from your perspective? You see a foreign alliance whose entire existence is predicated on opposing your country militarily that keeps expanding its membership for reasons that are strategically inexplicable. You see a U.S. government that's been trying since the start of this century to turn Ukraine into an American client state. And you see the relentless march of Western cultural imperialism. Americans don't really think of ourselves as imperialists because, in the literal sense, historically, we haven't been that. The only foreign country, in point of fact, that we have ever annexed by force was the Kingdom of Hawaii. In the First World War, we sent our boys overseas to liberate Europe from under the oppression of Imperial Germany. When the job was done, we went home. In the Second World War, we liberated Europe from German oppression again. And we liberated Asia and the Pacific from Japanese oppression. And again, when the job was done, we went home. We kept a few overseas military installations, but in the sense of claiming territory as spoils of war, we are the only great power in world history that has never made a habit of such things. But that's not to say we are not imperialists, because we very much are. And Vladimir Putin understands our brand of imperialism a lot better than most of our own people do. I heard someone say that there's a George Floyd memorial in Kiev, and I don't even know if they were serious or joking, because it's totally plausible that there would be such a thing. That is exactly the kind of imperialism that our country engages in and has been engaging in for upwards of 30 years now, ever since radical leftist identitarianism became our number one cultural export, replacing baseball and blue jeans. Now, Vladimir Putin views himself, above all else, as a guardian of Russian culture and tradition. And when there's a George Floyd memorial in the capital city of the country next door, he views that as an encroachment of U.S. cultural imperialism, and one which is far too close for comfort. We talked at some length back during the fall of Afghanistan and shortly thereafter about the fact that less than 3 months prior to those events, our embassy in Kabul had flown a rainbow flag. In other words, in the world's most conservative Muslim country, where we were going to be withdrawing our forces within a matter of weeks, where the situation was likely to become volatile and our people were likely to get killed if the thing went sideways, the wokesters in our diplomatic corps and in our ruling class more broadly, they did not see any problem with flying a hooray for homosexuality flag because, damn it, they wanted to post a bunch of self-congratulatory tweets about how woke and tolerant and progressive they are. And damn it, if a dozen Marines have to get sacrificed on the altar of their self-aggrandizement, then oh fucking well. That is what cultural imperialism looks like. Telling conservative religious people in other countries that we expect them to celebrate homosexuality and transgenderism just as enthusiastically as we do. Which didn't go over much better in Kingston, Jamaica, than it did in Kabul, Afghanistan, if you remember. The Jamaicans held a protest outside our embassy, and their spokesman spelled it right out. He said, "This is cultural imperialism. We are Christian people. We are conservative people. You offend us by flying these flags and acting like we are supposed to celebrate things that we think are wrong." For some reason, that story didn't get a whole lot of play in our mainstream fake news media, and I can't imagine why. A bunch of black Christian conservatives protesting against wokesterism? What, does that not comport with the standard narrative or something? If a country doesn't have a culture, its people are not a nation. Vladimir Putin believes, and I think he's probably right, that if he doesn't actively stand up against woke Western cultural imperialism, if the virus of wokesterism gets into Russia and starts infecting the people, then it's all over for the nation. We can't see ourselves because we're still too close to it in time and in place. How hollowed out our own culture has become, how we have lost anything resembling a moral center as a result of the rot that accompanies woke identitarianism. In attempting to understand the events of the past few days, we would do well to consider the possibility that, at least on some level, Putin and Russia are lashing out militarily because that is how damn frightened they are of Western-style wokesterism coming to Russia and destroying their culture in much the same way that it's destroyed our own. And that is all I have got for tonight. We'll see how things develop over the weekend, and we'll convene back here on Monday to take stock. Until then, thank you very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant, edifying weekend. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.